Have you ever wondered what it is that's going to make you a change agent as a leader? What it's going to take to future proof your leadership career in 2025? Well, today's guest, Therese Miclot, has an answer for us, which is facilitation. Now, you might be thinking, what on earth does facilitation have to do with future proofing my career? Stick with me. Facilitation is the thing that enables you to scale an organization. It's this icing on the technical skills that you probably at this point know are not enough. We talked about how to listen below the surface. What does that mean? How does that open doors for you as a leader? How does it open doors for your team? How does that help you solve problems? That's what Therese and I are talking about today. We also dug into how self-talk is your nemesis leader because of how it impacts your ability to facilitate a room. The message we are sending ourselves is the thing that controls how we are behaving externally. So come and have a listen to this episode on how in-demand leaders are facilitating. We're not just leading and talking, we facilitate to facilitate change. Without further ado, let's get Therese onto the show. Welcome to the show, Therese. It's great to have you with us today.
It's great to be here.
Well, I'm really excited to dig into what I know is your personal favorite topic around facilitation and how it transforms our experienced leaders. But I would love for you to start by explaining why you view facilitation as a missing ingredient in leadership. What led you to this point today having this conversation with me?
Sure. Yeah, it's really a passion of mine. And I guess I'd begin with, there's not really one universally accepted definition for facilitation, but the Latin root of facilitate is to make something easy, to kind of remove barriers, make it easier. And I just think that as leaders, it's so compelling because that's a big part of what we have to do every day, right? Make it easier for people to understand a new direction, make it easier for people to change, make it easier for meetings to be more effective. And so that resonated so deeply with me that I dedicated a lot of my career to uncovering what does facilitation look like, not for professional facilitators, although of course it applies to them, but for everyday leaders who have to get things done with others, influence without authority, collaborate really well.
Well, you hit on something really important there, which is we often think of facilitation as something professional facilitators do. It's something I've, for example, been trained in, is how to be a professional facilitator. So how did you figure out that this was something we all need to be doing? Because I don't think any of us think that naturally, like facilitation, That's the thing somebody over there does is not what I do in my team meetings. Where did this come from?
Yeah. Well, it starts even earlier in my career. I led global learning and development. I had HR strategy roles. And as I was listening to businesses and business leaders talk about, okay, where are we going to grow the business? And my job was to figure out, okay, how are we going to get people ready to deliver on that strategy or direction? And what I found was there was a lot of focus on technical skills, domain expertise, whether that's in sales or engineering or marketing or finance. But what I found was that what was missing and what prevented a lot of people from being able to scale with an organization is a whole other set of skills, especially when you reach that place from you were a super doer once to now you're a manager and a leader, that those technical skills just weren't enough to lead teams effectively, to grow people's capabilities, to navigate teams through difficult challenges and change. And so it really started to become clear to me that it was this kind of secret that no one was really examining closely for, it's a missing ingredient.
Mm-hmm. I think that's so important for us to understand that this is a missing ingredient because, again, I think people think facilitation is about running a workshop, but this is actually about being one of those leaders who removes obstacles. Because to me, and I think to you as well from our previous conversation before we hit record, it was leadership is about removing obstacles. Leadership is opening the doors for other people to do the work because you can't do it all yourself. So when we think of facilitation through that lens, how do we approach the challenges of the people in the room? Say we're running a team meeting. How does facilitation allow us to remove the obstacles of our team in front of us?
Yeah, I think of facilitation skills as just a series of choices. And the more that you feel like you can have and lean on a variety of choices when you're in a room with a group of people, the more equipped you are. So, for instance, reading the room, right? So if you have to deliver a lot of heavy information or complex information and you're noticing people starting to check out, or even the subtle signals that people give that they don't buy in or agree, right? The arms crossed, the eye roll, pull back from the table. And when leaders are astute at being able to catch and see the signals and then know, okay, I have a choice of what I could do. I could stop and ask a question instead of just delivering information. I could, instead of just delivering information, I could tell a story to make the content come alive. I could really pause and draw out more people to say, all right, I've spoken a lot, but what's really on your mind? To be able to get to the root of what is needed in order to help people buy into something or get on board with something. And so the more you have choices, as opposed to one note that you might, do often, the more you show up as a more capable leader.
I love that because it's like running through like, what does this look like? Well, so let's actually dig into this a little bit more. Like what do we need to be doing in a meeting? And I also want to talk about what do we do when it's an online meeting? I mean, despite the move back to the office, a lot of us are still 100% remote. My team is 100% remote. We're all over the world. How do we approach conversations every day with this facilitation mind? Where do we need to slow down? Where do we need to speed up? What does it look if people have got their cameras off? And I have a big bugbear about people having their cameras off. And I say this is somebody who's a complete introvert. Like, how do we deal with this?
Yeah. One of the skills that I focus on when it comes to facilitation is the skill of listening. And you know what? We're not really wired as human beings to be great listeners. And so sometimes, believe it or not, right, even though we sit in how many meetings a day and we're like, oh my gosh, all this information's coming at me. And it's probably the one place that I coach leaders the most on about leading meetings. Because sometimes our thought is, I have to be, the smartest person in the room, or I better have all the answers, or I better be able to make everybody buy into this, or just get everybody to nod their head. And it's doubly challenging virtually, right? When you may not be able to see the subtle sign, or like you said, people's cameras are off. So how would you know? And I think that the real deep skill for leaders, if they were to pick one, it's to really get much better at listening. What does that look like? Well, maybe like have a mental note of like, I've been speaking now for 2 minutes or 5 minutes and I've gotten no engagement.
Yeah.
That should be a signal. Like, let me stop here. Let me pause and check in. What's everybody thinking about what I've offered so far? And then the other real difficulty most of us have is pausing to actually allow people to answer, think of an answer before they reply. Yeah. It can be hard, right? That pause can feel awkward and strange, but it's what groups need in order to be able to like, that's an important question. Let me think about it before I answer it.
Yeah, that's so fascinating you say that, because I've been through some sales training recently. I'm actually bringing on an ex-client of mine who's a sales leader to talk about techniques in sales. She's going to be with us in about a month's time. For those listening who want to know about how we all need to use some of the sales techniques in our leadership, because it taught me so much about leadership. I thought I knew it all, not quite, but I'm never done learning. But it was going through some sales training myself. I was like, oh, there's some stuff here that helps us be better leaders. And a large part of it is pausing and asking yourself, when was the last time this person speaking to me responded? Like, when was the last time they looked interested? But even if it's just a phone call, like regularly pausing and saying, does that make sense? Is huge. I only learned that in sales. It makes so much sense in leadership. I've had to train people in pausing in leadership, but in sales, it's all about making sure they're coming with you. Why aren't we taught that as either? I mean, I teach it as a leader, but it isn't an obvious thing that nobody's mentoring us in that. That's a better way of putting it.
So true. It really is. Either we've learned it one way or another by having good modelers of it, or we haven't. And so we just follow what we've experienced. I'll also say that one of the things about listening is to listen below the surface. Yes. So I was with the group last week, and We were talking about a change that was going to happen. And one person asks in the call, is senior leadership going to do this too? And the leader just immediately answered, like, yes, they're bought into it and things like that. And it was a missed opportunity because deeper listening would have been curious about what's behind that question. Because believe it or not, it wasn't like simply yes or no, is leadership going to do this? The real issue that person had was, I haven't seen leaders really buy into something, or they say one thing and they aren't doing it. That was the conversation that needed to be had. And that's deeper listening beyond just data and facts. And so what I coached that person to do afterwards, I said, whenever that happens, it's easy to just immediately respond, but you can ask a follow-up question, like, what's behind that question? Or what's a concern that you have around, leadership's buy-in to get at what was really driving the question, because it wasn't just a yes or no.
I love this as a way of looking at facilitation, because you're spot on. This is that digging deep as facilitation. Because as soon as you said that, I thought that's a trust issue. And I would say so much of leadership is, it's unblocking things, but unblocking things is building the trust. When somebody, almost every question, not quite every question, a lot of questions are around trust. And so that lower level is like, what is the trust issue that's going on here? Like, why are they feeling that there's something they're nervous about, that they don't have the information around? Sometimes there are just clarifying questions, but even the clarifying questions, even with a great team, like I would say my team, of course I say this, really trusts me. But the clarifying questions are still like, they don't trust necessarily the thing I'm bringing to them because they don't know enough. That's not wrong. I haven't told them everything yet. Right. But there's always a trust thing going on. I'd almost suggest that facilitation is the trust build. You could almost like interchange those two words, facilitate, trust build.
Absolutely. Because I think when people do see you as someone who is really going to not stay at the surface about people's concerns, they're going to want to tell you more. They're going to find you more trustworthy. One of the skills that is, and so in the 20 years I've been teaching this skill to leaders, I don't find most people initially have it, is the skill of restating. And restating is just purely verbalizing your understanding of another person's perspective. And most of us, even if we've learned this before, it sounds like a technique and we hate it. So it sounds like, so Tony, what I think I hear you saying is, and you're like,
right?
But if you can do it in a way where it's your own voice, it's just the essence of what someone's talking about, you don't even have to agree with it. You're just verbalizing their point of view. So back to the example, it might be, you're skeptical that this is really going to be something that changes the culture. You're really skeptical that senior leadership is really going to put their money where their mouth is. It's not, you don't have to agree with it. It's just verbalizing their point of view. It's a big trust builder.
It is huge.
Because someone will say, well, yeah.
I think this is something that we taught the year, this restating thing. Feeling heard is so rare. It is something I think most of us don't feel heard in most aspects of our lives, and whether it's with our partners, our kids, our bosses, our team, we don't feel heard. If you could be the person that makes that person feel heard, even if you don't agree, it immediately builds that trust. When we build trust, we can then activate them.
That for sure. You can also restate to a group. So sometimes I work with leaders who are like, I want to show up with more credibility or capability, but I'm not necessarily the leader of the room. What facilitation skills give you is the capability to show up differently or with more impact, no matter what seat you take. So for instance, you can be the big ear. So sometimes, have you ever noticed that you're in team meetings and people are going round and round, or there's like violent agreement, or we're basically saying the same thing using different words, but are stuck. You can be the big ear, as I call it. You can restate and you can say, all right, we've spent 5 minutes on this. I think we're saying the same thing. It's this. And it unhooks the group. It shows up again, because there's such a lack of listening, that it can be a differentiator for people and how they, operate in groups.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, one of the things that when we were talking before, is you described an advanced listener is an activator for problem solving. What
Yeah.
do you mean by that? Like, let's discuss, like, why does listening help people solve problems?
Sure. Because I think this is back to like the level of listening. So if you just listen to facts at the surface, you'll get some information. But if you pause problem solving or questioning for a few minutes and go deeper, and just because when people feel heard and understood, they will tell you more things. And when you learn more things, you'll probably get to the root of issues. And the thing is that you want to solve for root issues. If you ever find yourself, it's like a whack-a-mole approach to problem solving, like I'm having this conversation with this person 5 times. Here we go again.
Ooh.
It's a real signal you're staying at the surface. And if you can listen to, wonder what's driving their behavior, or they've said 4 times now that they don't think that, leadership, is going to buy off on this. What's below that, that I can solve for? And it's actually a faster way at getting to root issues versus just continuing to try to, run your day and solve the surface of issues.
Okay, so what would you say is the most important technique for helping us transform our mindset as a leader from being the loudest voice in the room, where a lot of the time we've been told we need to speak up more as women, we need to, assert our opinions, we need to be right, we can't be stupid. There's an internal dialogue there,
Right.
but there's also people giving us that advice over the years, like, don't open your mouth if you don't know what you're talking about, but make sure you talk more. And it's like this, all this like talk. And now you and I are saying you need to stop being the loudest voice in the room. So how do we go to being the big ear? Like, what would you say we need to be thinking?
Well, you know what? I would go straight to self-talk. So it's one of the first facilitation contributions because everything emanates from inside. So most people talk to themselves, and the messages they're sending to themselves, it's like a billboard, even if they don't verbalize it. So for instance, if you say to yourself, you're heading into a meeting and you're thinking, I better sound like I know what I'm doing. I better have all the answers. I'm the leader, so I better know. Don't screw up. Well, that's going to drive your emotions. So what would your emotions be if you're saying to yourself, you better have all the answers to the questions?
Mm-hmm.
Probably nervous, a little anxious, worried. Well, guess what? If I were to follow any person around and I watch them operate when they're nervous, frustrated, anxious, they're going to behave in a certain way.
Mm-hmm.
They might talk too much, talk too fast. I don't want any questions. So I'll just, fill the air with talking. And then what happens is your behaviors are indicators to others about how they should interact with you. And then they might be now like, wait, hold up. What did you say? They might now question more of you because of how you're showing up. And then it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. You see, they're like, wow, they're picking apart my questions or, asking me all these detailed questions. See,
Yeah.
I wasn't prepared. I should have had all the answers. So before anything, it's the voice in your head has to support whatever it is your goal is.
Mm-hmm.
So if your goal is, I really want people to be candid with me, tell me the truth, lay their cards on the table. I don't want to have the meeting after the meeting. If you ever had that, like everybody congregates. So if you don't want to be that kind of leader, then it starts with what are you saying to yourself about how you want to, whatever your goal is. So maybe your goal is, I don't have to have all the answers. I want to be able to, draw others out or stay curious. And as I coach a lot of leaders who are very experienced, this is the challenge for them, because it's easy to think like, I've seen it all, right? I already know your question. If you stop talking, I will tell you the answer.
Mm-hmm.
And it prevents us from being a really good listener. So one of the seeds I planted in a leader's head recently was curiosity. And the curiosity for this person was, I wonder where's the edge of what I know? Where's the edge of my knowledge? And what that made that person do is not to just jump to, I already know what you're going to say. I can give you the answer if you stop talking. I'll just tell you what to do. to lean towards showing up differently in meetings and asking more questions. So it all starts with self-talk.
That's so spot on. And just the definitions you've given there of like the stages, like that, in a dialogue. And so the self-doubt being one of them. I think the other one is frustration. That happens a lot when we've got to a certain point, we're not getting any further. That sometimes comes from self-doubt, interestingly. But that inner dialogue dictating our behavior, we show up differently. Therefore, the people around us show up differently, and we become self-fulfilling. This is like one of the things I talk about so much, but I love your language around this because I talk about it from an executive presence standpoint. You can direct how the conversation goes simply by how you show up. I will use the word gravitas, which sometimes irritates people, but essentially the way you show up dictates how that person responds to you. You can use the same words even, but how fast you talk, the tone you use, the eye contact or lack thereof, the pausing, the asking questions, all of that dictates how well your side of the conversation goes and dictates how well that person's going to respond. People don't believe this. And yet you and I have got so much evidence.
See it all the time.
Yeah, it just changes things.
Yeah. What also facilitation does to this idea of executive presence is back to choice. Because I do think that when we think about presence, it's not a do or don't. It's a bit about what is my goal with the interaction I'm about to have. You might want to raise your status, and status being something hardwired in us as humans that, we've looked to, when we first walked the earth, who's going to keep us safe, who's going to keep us fed. So it's deeply wired in us to look for signals, eye contact, posture, clarity in your message. So when you're working with more senior level people, you want to match status. But I bet we both work with leaders who also need to be able to know when to lower their status.
Yes.
Senior executives who can be intimidating just by virtue of their title, nothing else. Maybe it's even, they don't see themselves as intimidating, but they walk into a room, and if they just simply ask the, questions, hey, I'm here. Any questions? Any questions? Come on, I won't bite.
It never goes well. It never works. It never works.
Never going to get anything. And so lowering your status for more senior leaders, or let's say you're hiring a bunch of interns or you're hiring a new hire, would not be to raise your status, but to match it with people who are, earlier in career or just joining the company. So that might sound like, hey, you know what? No one's perfect here. We're not expecting it. I will make mistakes. You will make mistakes. So no question is a bad one. So I'd love to know what's on your mind right now. That is lowering your status in a way that will engage people to say, all right, well, didn't know how to ask this, but versus just, staying stagnant. And so it's about being able to have this range of behaviors. Maybe, you're starting the meeting with the board of directors, but the next, meeting is a kickoff or welcome to, an onboarding, session. And then you're going to be with a really technical audience the next day. And then you're going to be customer facing with the client in the afternoon. So the more you feel like you have these choices of how am I going to show up, and I have the skills to be able to still authentically be myself, but be able to pull from different levers that are a force multiplier. We call this facilitation skills are a force multiplier to the leadership skills that you already have.
I love it so much. And I love this, it's all authentic. I think that's really important to emphasize here. A lot of people think this kind of thing is not authentic. I have a lot of conversations about executive presence not feeling authentic. And I'm like, okay, we're not doing it right then. This should feel authentic. Right. But in the same way that hugging your kids feels authentic, but so does standing up and talking to your team. But you're not going to go and hug them and shower them in kisses the way you would your kids. You can have two different behaviors that are authentic. It doesn't make you somehow, none of us show up the same way to everything. Authenticity is, I am going to respond in this way to this situation. And it's slowing down enough to say, this situation needs this version of me. That's still me, and not making it wrong in a way.
Yeah. In a way, it makes you a better diagnostician before you just immediately decide what to do. And, to the point of authenticity, I think of it like learning a second language. If you speak the second language, it doesn't mean you're not authentically you. It just means that you're flexing to the culture and the language and the environment you're in. You're still you. You just have a better capability at communicating with those that don't necessarily speak your native language. And so in the same way, I think of presence and facilitation skills, it's just the versatility and flexibility to feel like you have a set of skills and not just one note in terms of how you show up meeting to meeting.
I love that. I love that so much. Well, let's talk a little bit about how we can use our matching our status to make our meetings more inclusive. Because I think that's an obvious step, right? If you match status, it's not just that you're, breaking barriers, you're actually going to make it more inclusive. How does that work? Like, what are we doing that means people are feeling like you've got 10 people in a room and a couple of people are always excluded? What can we do there?
Yeah. Well, actually, you can raise and lower other people's status. So it's not even just about yourself. So the first thing I would focus on is how do you raise the status of other people in a space? So, for example, you might say, okay, we've heard a lot of ideas, but Tony, I haven't heard your perspective. What do you think?
Mm-hmm.
So you might draw someone out, or you might say, Tony, you were saying this really great idea before, and I think everybody should hear it. Tell everybody. That's raising your status. Also, sometimes when I work with women leaders, what they find is that they might express the point of view, it doesn't get acknowledged, and then it gets acknowledged later by someone else who said it. Here's how you could raise status. You can say, oh, that's a really good point, John. I think, Tony, you made that point earlier, didn't you? That we should really be focusing on this market instead. So it's not denigrating John or, for his point, but it's also recognizing how we have a responsibility to be noticing the dynamics of what's happening in the room. Also, even when, one of the things that I find a lot of people I work with are frustrated about is, especially virtually, is like, it's like pulling teeth. I can't get people to talk. And we've already talked about asking better questions, but I think you can also, restate what you're noticing. So I'll say, wow, I wish we were all together. And since your cameras are off, I'm having a tough way of interpreting your silence. How should I interpret that? How should I interpret it? And I was in a session once and this was happening. It was kind of rare. And I was trying to pull out all my tricks, right? It's like, why are people engaging with me? And it was a client I hadn't worked with a lot. And I finally said, wow, I'm just noticing it's been difficult to get everyone to participate in this conversation. What's happening? What am I not noticing? And one person said, well, we've just been all getting this email about reductions that are happening in other parts of the business. I had no idea.
Yeah.
And it's easy, your self-talk, to blame other people for their silence, right? Like they're just not an energetic group. Like, they're just not engaged. When really it's our responsibility to be able to kind of identify what is happening for people that will either enable them to speak or not. And so I think our status shows in our comfort with being with the discomfort, right?
Yeah.
Like the elephant in the room and no one is saying it. And if you can do that in a way that's just acknowledging we're all here, we're all recovering from, reductions that have happened quarter after quarter. And, this is a difficult place to be right now.
Yeah. I love that example because I always say to my clients, there's always another explanation. They'll have a story about why something didn't happen, didn't work. I can always give you 5 potential reasons why, at least 5, often infinite numbers. The majority of the time, if you don't ask, you are not going to know. So when somebody says didn't like that, when somebody ghosts you, when somebody doesn't respond, there's always another reason other than the self-talk in your head that you've come up with. There's always. So stop taking it so personally, stop getting angry, stay curious. And I think facilitation is so much easier when we stay curious.
Oh, that's where I go to when I don't know where else to go with my self-talk. It's always just stay curious. And I love what you just said too, is what don't I know? As opposed to, I know what's going on here. What am I not aware of that I should be tuning into?
Yeah.
Is even, curiosity. And finally, I think the self-talk is when people feel heard and understood, they are also more likely to be willing to hear you. I think if you can be the generous leader and be like, even if I don't agree, I'm going to listen to your point of view. I'll state mine, but only after
Mm-hmm.
you feel heard.
Mm-hmm.
So if, someone is, arms crossed and you're like, okay, so Tony, I can tell, that, this isn't meshing with what you thought we were going to do. And you're like, well, whatever, it is what it is. I could just, okay, well, let's move on. That's a choice. Or I could say, from your point of view, you just feel like we're setting ourselves up for failure.
Mm.
That's a restatement. And you might say, well, yeah, because they're asking us to do all this and we don't have the resources. And so I might say, so it feels impossible that we would be able to get this done in this quarter. No, I mean, and so I'm still listening. Now, you as a leader, I'm not saying you can't disagree. You can say, after you restate and you get some like, yeah, that's how I feel. Then you can say, well, I see it differently. Or, I think I think there is a creative way for us to get it done. You're going to get a lot farther, a lot quicker if you address and listen to their concerns first and then know how to pivot to offering your point of view.
Yeah, I love that. Okay, well, I want to ask you one final question before we move on to the quickfire round, because I want to dive into a little bit like how can somebody get started, particularly when 2025 is looking like it's going to be a bit of a tumultuous year. We've already seen a reduction in middle management positions in the last 18 months. Senior positions, not so much, but there's this concern that traditional leadership is not working. We need to move forward. There's the concern there's not as many jobs for us all, which it's actually going to be nice. I think 5% reduction in middle management and only middle management. So it's not as big as we were concerned to be. How can we use what you're talking about today to help us future-proof our careers, make more crucial, more powerful? Like, what is it we should all be doing?
Yeah, I think the key word, as you said, I think facilitation skills helps to future-proof yourself. Because here's what we do know. I think the leaders that are going to be in demand know, again, how to lead teams. They know specifically how to help accelerate teams through change, right? Like that, it's just, change times 10 now. And so what I would offer is there's kind of 10 contributions, as we call them, on facilitation. My suggestion is to try to pick one or two. Don't try to do everything. On top of everything else that's going on, I would double down on a couple. So we have 10. So it might be mindset. It might be if the voice in your head is like, this is useless, this is pointless, we're all going to, lose our jobs anyway. That is going to show up in your behavior and it will become a self-fulfilling prophecy. So you might focus on mindset and you might focus on presence. Because if you do find yourself that, okay, the stark reality is, my role might be eliminated, well, then you're going to have to be thinking about how you are going to show up as you network. Another skill that you will probably need is story. So storytelling. Story is sticky. And if you're going to need to influence without authority, whether that's in, job interview or in tough performance conversations or whatever it is, you're going to need to rely on those skills. So I wouldn't try everything. I would pick a couple things and really become more habitual with those skills, whether it's listening, presence, story, mindset.
Okay, I love that. Figure out the skill that you want to start becoming more habitual in. Work on that. What results are we looking for there? How can we measure success here?
I think in a couple ways. One, I think it is how people start to include you in different ways, right? So some of it is, I think the first thing you can start to see is how people interact with you differently, right? That people are going to tell you more, that people are going to engage you more. That would be the first, because if your goal is to try to show your credibility and capability continuously, these are signals that will be given to other leaders. That would be the first thing I think is that you can expect to see. Long term, and I when I was in HR roles, I would be a part of talent review conversations, where the senior executives talk about their succession and people that are, ready for the next role or not. And I truly, these are the kinds of skills that would come up, because these people were usually excellent at their domain, their craft. They were not able to make this jump to leading others this way. I do think that it won't happen overnight, but I do think if you consistently use these skills, you become more valuable to the organization. You are a better problem solver.
Mm-hmm.
You show up with more presence, and that can lead you in a direction you want, whether it's, I want to pivot my career to something different, whether it's I really want that senior role, whether it's, I think I need to make a right turn and start to interview for other jobs. You will distinguish yourself from others, that so many people don't have these skills.
Yeah, 100%. Well, this has been amazing, but let's move on to the quickfire round, because I always love to ask these questions. Little bit of a pivot. What is the worst piece of advice you've ever been given?
The worst piece of advice is just ignore it.
Oh,
Just ignore it. Meaning, like, sometimes it's like over optimism of like, just don't think about it. Don't let that get in your way. And I think that's not helpful. I think it's about mindset. Like, okay, if you're worried about it, don't try to think it away. Like, okay, I'm thinking that I'm not good enough for this. I've got to rewire my brain a little bit. So ignoring it doesn't help.
Ignoring it never helps. It just gets bigger. It becomes a bigger problem. Whatever you ignore, it just becomes a bigger issue, in my experience. Whether it's our internal self-talk or a problem that we've got in our lives, it always becomes bigger. What is the best piece of advice you've ever been given?
I think the best piece of advice is, I'll beat this drum again, is just listen. Just listen. And it's so counterintuitive when you think that your value is talking. And, that I work with a lot of leaders who are like, well, if I'm not talking, I'm not showing my value.
Mm-hmm.
And it's so counterintuitive. And you said it before, like there's such a lack of listening. And I really think of it like it's the Clark Kent of leadership skills, like, right? Like, Clark Kent, unassuming, yeah, but it's a superpower. So I learned from some great mentors early on, like double down on listening,
Mm-hmm.
and it's just set me up.
It's fascinating because a lot of the women that come to work with me are very much like I was, very introverted, quite quiet in the room, and they've been told they need to speak up. And they have the listening skills, they just don't then know how to channel it. But I tell you what, when they come to me and we can talk about how to channel it, how to get out their own self-talk, they suddenly become overnight the best leaders in the room. I've done this time and time again with clients, because these women have spent their entire careers being the unassuming listener in the room. Mm-hmm. There's another category of people that come to me who are, the way they've coped with being the only woman in the room is to talk, but nobody's listening. And you've got to have both. You've got to say the right words, but to do that, you've got to listen.
Yeah. One tip I just gave to a woman who was like, okay, I am more introverted. I listen intently to meetings, but how do I activate that? Mm-hmm. And I said, you know what? This person happens to do a meeting where there's like a lot of like whiteboards. I'm like, go up to the whiteboard. Don't say anything. Don't ask for permission. As the group is talking, take the whiteboard, marker, and start to, because you're listening, start to summarize some of the key things. All of a sudden, you didn't even have to say, hey, is it okay if I start to take notes? Because you're not a note taker.
Oh, yeah, it's really important.
Notes. But it is not to be confused with note taking. What it is like my value add may not necessarily be, to be the smartest person in the room, to say the smartest things, but I'm going to be able to start to distill down what's the essence of what we're agreeing to, mm-hmm. or themes. And if you come with that mindset, just take the marker. And as the listener, you've just had much more profound effect than if you were to just kind of, stay quiet.
Yeah, 100%. I love that. This has been such a powerful conversation. So how can people find out more about you, what you do, connect with you? Where do we find you, basically?
I would love to connect with people. Find me on LinkedIn would be the first thing. So that's number one. I post quite a bit on tips and ideas around facilitation. And then the next thing I would do is from the book, The Facilitation Advantage, that I co-authored, we have a free self-assessment. And it's a really quick way, back to your point of like, okay, if I'm only going to work on a couple things, what should those things be? That will help you decide. So we talked about maybe it's mindset, maybe it's listening, maybe it's presence. It could be other things. That's going to help you narrow in for, the next half of the year. I think that would be the highest leverage thing for me to be focused on, and just pick one or two. And then of course from there, besides the book, there's coaching that I do individually. We have workshops for technical teams in particular that need to be able to facilitate technical content with non-technical people. And so there's a multitude of ways to work together.
I love that. Love that so much. Well, we'll make sure all those links are in the show notes. So if you are interested in finding out about the Facilitation Advantage, Therese's book, or you want to try that quiz, and try and find out where you need to be looking at in the next 12 months for your facilitation leadership skills, make sure you head to her website, go to the show notes, click on the links, and you will be able to connect with Therese. Thank you. I would like to ask this question. What is the final thought you would like to share? What do you want to leave our audience with today?
I think it's like, don't believe everything you think. Like back to, we talk to ourselves pretty much all the time, and we can say things we would never say to others. So don't believe everything you think. Think of it as a skill. Catch your thought, manage it. And that would be my wish for everyone listening.
Love it. Well, thank you so much for being with us today. I really appreciate it. And I hope listeners have learned as much as I have. It's been so nice to talk to somebody who specializes in the facilitation end of like the executive presence stuff that I love to talk about. This has been so wonderful to have this conversation. Thank you.
Well, you've done a wonderful job facilitating. So it's been such a pleasure.
Thank you very much.